It's not the actual Game of Thrones. It's just kind of like how they do the building of their buildings at the beginning of the show. We're doing something like that, okay? Yeah, you can do that. So it's a Game of Thrones-esque scene is what we're going to be animating. Basically, I'm giving you a file that you're going to start with, and that file has all the stuff kind of rigged, and you're focusing on just animation and timing of all these elements kind of coming together, okay? It'll give you a good foundation for navigating in Maya some more, animating, dope sheet, and then texturing and lighting. Yes, sir.
So is it basically just the buildings rising from the ground and
Well, it falls down, but everything kind of grows. Everything it like builds. So you'll be working on setting keyframes, manipulating timing, basic materials and lighting, rendering an Arnold, and compiling a sequence. Okay. These things that we learn in this one will carry over to all the other assignments, right? Our ability to set keyframes, manipulate where they're at in time is essential. When you turn your stuff in, you'll turn in everything. And I'm going to include in there, where is that one? There it is. Everything minus rendered images. Okay, so just like when you were in cinema class, you'd render out an image sequence and have a whole bunch of files. I don't need all the individual files that you rendered out. I just need that movie for the end, okay? The movie in your scene. The animation should be about 5 to 7 seconds-ish. You might do it a little bit longer, but typically that's a good frame of time for these kinds of animations. 960 by 540 will be our constant resolution that we render out all of our movies. 30 frames a second. The points are different though. Let me make sure the points are... I'm going to put that there. Go to this. I lied. The points are the same, 3. The later assignments have more points. And then make sure your name is your name. And then when you turn it in, it'll be the turn-in date. And then any of these sheets, if you don't get it, like you're not here a day, whatever it is, I have a purple binder up here that I have all the sheets in. So that way you can actually just like come up here, grab one of the sheets off the board, and then just fill it out, okay? Or if you lose your sheet, the information is going to be right inside this purple binder. All right, so for our project today, we're going to be,
so it was at 2540, right?
yep, we're going to be using this file on Canvas. So you need to log into Canvas and download this file.
Also, the homework last time, I couldn't find the articles on Canvas. Where were they?
For the other class, 2560, there's article.
Yeah, where were the articles?
It should be... Okay, so log into your Canvas, download this Game of Thrones house file. All right, so we've downloaded the Game of Thrones thing. Yes? Yeah, from the modules under that. Yep, it says Game of Thrones house.mb. So download that. Don't put it into a folder yet. We have to make the folders. When we go into Maya, we're going to set up our project, and then we'll copy that into our scenes folder, okay? All right, so we're in Maya? Yes, okay. So go to File, Project window.
Are we supposed to be in like Maya with the house on it? Or?
No, just regular Maya.
Was it Autodesk Maya 2018 or something?
Yep. That's the only one that should be on there. So under File, Project Window, you're going to go to New and make a new project. And you're going to call it your last name _ Game of Thrones. And then for the location, it should be defaulting to your 2540 folder. If it's not, click the folder and then default it to your 2540 folder.
So they go to file and then what?
Project Window. Yep.
Okay, got it downloaded. Wait for Maya to open, and then if you click the MB file.
Nope, don't click the MB file. We have to put it in the right spot first. Whenever you double click a Maya file, it doesn't set your project or create your project, so all the linking that would happen isn't there. So we need to make sure that our folders are set up correctly. We put our file into the right folder, and then from Maya, we have to go to File Open and open it that way. So pretty much for every file that you start inside Maya, this is the process to go through, okay? Going to that project window, setting up all your folders. In Cinema class, typically you created those folders. You made a textures folder, you made a scenes folder, you made a whatever folder. Maya will do that for us. So all of these are different folders that it's making for us. We have to just put the stuff in the right folders, and then Maya will be happy. Okay, so whenever we save something in Maya, it should go into the scenes folder. Whenever we open something, it should come out of the scenes folder. If it's coming from anywhere else, that's going to cause issues. Whenever we render stuff, it should go into the images folder. Whenever we bring textures in, it should go into the source images folder. Okay, for the rest of these, we typically don't need to go into. But scenes, images, and source images are typically those three areas that we're constantly in and out of. Okay. Cool. So now I need to copy my stuff into the right area. So I'm going to go into where it downloaded that Game of Thrones, and I'm going to cut it from there. It's probably under downloads. That's typically where it's going to go, or right on the D drive, P drive of your computer. Okay. And then put it into the scenes folder of your Game of Thrones. All right, so now we're going to close the folder and then just go into Maya and then open up that Game of Thrones file. Okay, so you should see it. If you go to File Open in Maya, it should say Game of Thrones. If it doesn't, on the left side, you can see where the scenes are, and then you should be able to get that Game of Thrones. All right, so this is the Game of Thrones house. Now, every time you start a new project, you go to File, Project window, and you make a new project. Whenever we come in and we have an old project we're working on, like next class, if you're still working on Game of Thrones, which you probably will be, you don't go to Project Window, you go to Set Project. And you just have to make sure you tell Maya, I'm working on Game of Thrones, set the project. That way Maya knows this is the project I'm working on. If we had 15 projects, we need to go through that process every single time. I recommend when you come in to do that every single time. If you don't do it, what's going to happen is when you render, Maya will go to some random folder. So on my computer here, I have this other Maya folder, and this is where my stuff typically goes because I tell it to go there because it's a different drive and I have more space there. But you don't want that to happen. You want everything that you render to go into the correct folder for that project. So we have to make sure that we have our project set every single time. So this is the Game of Thrones house. If we zoom out, you'll see a set of numbers over here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. each one of these things will control something in this scene here, okay? So if I were to click on, let's say, the 8, you'll see that the tree on the right gets highlighted. Over here on the right, it says right plant up. If I click on that and I come out here and I middle mouse button drag, you'll see how it collapses into nothing. Okay, if I go to the right, it'll grow. So this is already rigged. I actually went through and built all these pieces and then created these controls for it so that this kind of function could happen. That's what's called rigging. And it's just going to make your job a lot easier to animate because all you're doing is going in there and setting keyframes for this item and this item and that item and then controlling when they move. What order do you think that these are going to go in for the animation?
Gonna go from left to right, and I think the house is gonna be. Oh, right, the ground's gonna be 0. The one's gonna be the house. Two's gonna be the roof. Three's gonna be the door.
Yep.
You're going way too fast. I think yeah.
So they go straight, right? You start at 0 and you work your way to 8. Okay. So grab your number 0. On the far right in the channel box here, you see what it says, ground out. That's the control that we are going to use to control the ground going in and out of view. Okay? Sir?
Now the file's being saved, created by a student version of mine.
That's fine. Just hit continue. You'll get that every time you save. So we're going to click on the word ground out. And Maya's hotkeys work depending on where your mouse is clicked. So if I'm over here, this hotkey isn't going to work. So I need to move out into this viewing area, and I'm going to hold down the middle mouse button scroll wheel and drag left and right. Okay, so you should see the ground growing and collapsing. Yes? Okay. So notice how far up that slider will go. Right? Like a crazy number. Whenever we make controls, we want controls that are easy to manipulate. So this one right here doesn't have a direct, this is where it's starting point and this is where it's ending point. So literally I could rewind this all the way to like negative numbers and it would literally go on forever. Negative 10,050, right? So anytime we make controls, we want to have controls that make sense for us, okay? So this file is all about animating, but it's also about showing you what bad controls are too, okay? So you'll see some good controls as we go. So the start of this is actually around 16.5 is where it actually starts the animation for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my, I'm cut off on the side. I hate when it does that. Let me just slide this over. I can close that. Good. Okay. So I want to make sure that my time is all the way at frame 1. I should be able to see that right here. It's at frame 1. I can verify it. It says frame 1 right there. And I'm just going to make sure I've clicked on the number 0, clicked on ground out, and then I'm going to hit either the S key to set a keyframe on that single item, or I'm going to right click and do key selected. If you don't have your preferences set up, Joanne, you have to do right click on that and key selected. There you go. Okay, so that sets the start keyframe for this. I want you to start here. So I'm starting it with this at 16.5. Did you hit S? Okay.
Is there a move around keyframes?
There is not in here. That's what we're going to go over once we start setting them.
That's funny how you can't really drag. I mean, a further program I use, you can drag around the keyframes.
Yeah, it's weird that you.
Seems kind of inefficient.
It is. So now we're going to go up to, let's say, 50. And then I'm going to click on that ground out. I'm going to middle drag just until the entire ground is built, which is at like 33.2. And then I'm going to keyframe that. Okay, so now we've set keyframes for the first thing. So now we're going to go to number 1. So let me click on number 1. And let's look at the controller for that one. So ground out, it went to like negative crazy number to positive crazy number, went forever. Here's house open. So look at this one. Where's the range on this one? 0 to 1. Okay, so this is the opposite side of the spectrum. This is probably a little bit too tight, where we don't really have a whole lot of control over it because it's only going like 1 unit. Okay, it still works, it still animates, everything will be fine. It's just as we're previewing it, we don't get the fine control we would with the other one. That other one I could literally scrub, and the faster I scrub, the more I'll see it, you know, kind of building itself.
I can somewhat scrub mine.
Right, you can do it a little bit, but it's still not as subtle as the other one. Yep. Now, if you hold the control key as you do it, you would actually do it slower. So I get a little bit more control over it if I use the control key. Now, because of the kind of animation we're doing, this is not terribly important to see it as we're going. It's more important if this was a character, that as we move the feet or the eyes or the arms or whatever it is, that we can see the controls. But for this, it literally is, everything's going to be like start here, end here, start here, end there. And so that's what we're going to be setting up. Okay. So I'm going to set this to 0. I'm going to go to about 31. What I'm looking for in my animation is that the ground is already covering where the house is going to be. Okay? So I want to make sure that the ground is already laid before the house falls on top of it. Otherwise, it's going to look weird, the ground like falling into nothingness. So I'm going to go to about 31. That seems like a good one for me. I'm going to set a keyframe on house open. I'll scooch up a little bit. Use house open, and then set a key. Don't worry about too much exactly where my keyframes are and getting your keyframes lined up. All right, so the process for any kind of keyframes is going to be the same regardless of what we're doing. We set our time, we set our value, we set a key. Set your time, set your value, set a key. Set your time, set your value, set a key. Okay? So don't be too concerned about the aesthetics of how this is all coming together. That's the next part of this. Once we set all of our keyframes and get like a rough animation, we'll go into the dope sheet and start moving stuff around to really line it up so that it feels a little bit more flowy than what we're seeing here. This, it's actually finished by the time the house gets in there, and I don't really care for that. Okay, so we'll adjust that after. All right, so what number's next? 2. So we click on 2.
I might imagine what kind of sound effects you could put up with this.
Yeah. When should the roof come in? Yeah, once the house is done, right?
I think around like frame around 52, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, give it some time to let the people process the thing coming out, and then boom, goes the roof.
Yep. So let's go to wherever, 49, 50, wherever it is. Let's set this at 0 to start. And then go up a little bit, make the roof come down into place, and then set a key again. Before you do that, just something to note. So number 3 here, I think that's my first perfect one, yes. Okay. So number 3 is actually a perfect way to set up something that's controlled. If I click on that and I scrub backwards, 0 is the stopping point. It doesn't go any further than 0. And when I go to the right, 10 is as high as it goes. So that's like a perfect value to go with in order for this thing to get into position. So go throughout all of these and just set keyframes. Where do you want to start animating? Where do you want to end? Where do you want to start? Where do you want to end? So take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, you can continue doing that after with all the other ones. The process, again, is going to be just another repetitive process. After we get our baseline of keyframes in there, the next step is to start offsetting them, tweaking them, modifying them, so that our animation feels a little bit more blended and nicely smoothed out. What we don't want to have is something where, let's say, one item pops in very slowly, something else flies in very quick, there's a huge pause, and then something else happens. We want it to feel like it's flowing from one piece to the next piece to the next piece to the next piece. So I'm going to turn off some of my features I have. There we go. So we're going to use the dope sheet for that. So if you go to Window, Animation Editors, Dope Sheet if you don't have it, or you go to the Dope Sheet button, then we should be good. And then what I want to do is those numbers, remember they start at 0 and then they end up at 8, that's the order that they should be going in. If I randomly were to have grabbed all of these items here, they're going to be in some crazy order based off of how Maya decides to select things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my outliner on the left to select them in the order that I want them to show up in here so I can see that progression, okay? So I'm going to open up my controls, and if I click on this, I don't know why that one's first. There we go. All right, I lied. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to shift click them in order of right here. There we go. Okay. Now this shows them in the order that they're being animated, just so you can see a couple of the features of the dope sheet. This is all of our items that we're animating. Yeah, see there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's the order it should be. This here is each one of these different items. So every single one of those objects has their own curve, their own way that they're getting animated. This up here is the dope sheet summary. So if I were to have, let's say, an animation of a character, they might have 5 or 10 or 20 or 1,000 different things that I animated. I may want to move everything for that character over without having to select all the individual pieces. So if I were to just grab stuff up here, these grab the same thing all the way down. So it's kind of like grabbing that whole group. So if I want to take this whole animation and scoot it over, that's where I would do it, is up there. Maya doesn't let you marquee both of those items at the same time, okay? So if I were to drag this, it'll probably do it. Yeah, it did good. If I do this, you'll see how it doesn't select anything. If I marquee the 1, make sure I'm in the move tool. Oh, there it goes. It was just delayed. If I do the 1, it'll work. Come on. There we go. Or if I do the bottom one, it'll work, but it won't let me obviously do both of those items. So just be aware of that. If I click on this, it will let me grab both or all the keyframes for that item. So if I simply want to take an item and just move it down, I can just click on the name and just shuffle it left or right. Same thing here, and all the way down the list. So what I'm looking at here is I want to make sure, again, that we have this nice flow. If we have a big animation item, that should take more time. If we have a small animation item, that should take less time, okay? So something like, something like the ground getting built, that's a big item. There's a lot of intricate movement to it, so that's going to take some time to happen. The house coming in is a big item. The doors and the windows, those are kind of smaller items. There's not a whole lot of space that they move around in. Same thing with like the roof and the plants. This walkway, That's a bigger item. I want to see all that detail, okay? So what I want to do is I'm going to go to my move tool, and I'm just going to look at where those keyframes are for these things and just kind of look at one item at a time. Even though everything's animated, I'm going to look at one item at a time. So I'm going to slide this down here for a second, and then just rewind this and just kind of zone out on all the other pieces. I'm looking at just the ground now to see, do I like the way that the ground is animating? Do I feel that that's a good amount of time? I may want this to take a little bit longer so I can see more of that growth happening. So I'm going to actually take this keyframe and just middle drag and bring it down to like 78. I don't ever jump out and start animating something without previewing it first. There we go. Maybe I'll go frame by frame and see that. Okay. I can definitely tell I need to update the house because the things are in the way. I'll fix that. That's not a problem. Or maybe I'll take this and just scoot it back a little bit and that'll take care of it. Yep, I'll still need to update the house, but I think that's good. Okay, so now I'm going to go through to the next one. I'm going to go to the house, which is here, and just middle drag this over a few frames. It goes through one frame, so let me just scoot that forward. A couple frames until it doesn't do that anymore. There we go. And then the roof comes in. That looks like a good spot for the roof to be coming in. Okay, the doors and windows come out. That's good. And then you'll see there's a big break between this stuff happening here and the plants actually coming out. So another thing I want to do is here's the plants. I'm going to pull those ones back so they actually start a little bit earlier. And I want those to be offset some. I typically don't want to have anything animate at the exact same time. I want to appear that there is some overlap there. When we looked at the principles of animation, one of them was don't do twinning. Don't do the same thing on the left and the same thing on the right at the exact same time unless it's like for an intentional reason. Same thing here, I don't want to have that. So I'm going to grab, I think that's number that.
What key do we hold to move those around?
We're just middle mouse button dragging. All right, you got to wait till I'm done and I'll come over. Oh, I'm at the end, that's why it's not updating. Move my ticker over here. There you go. So this is the right window. So you can see how I'm just offsetting the right window a little bit. And then I'll grab this one. And that's probably the left window. So by the time I'm done, I should have something that feels like it flows nicely and I don't see any like weird pauses, anything that like zips like too quick. Okay, so that feels a lot nicer than it did a minute ago when everything was very staticky and just kind of like on there. It's one thing to animate something, but being able to animate it so it's pleasing to look at is a bit different. And I like how too, if I look at this, the house hits, the roof hits, and as the roof hits, that kind of like pops the window into creation. And then the window gets created at the same time that the door is, and then the same time that the other window is. So your eye kind of like follows the roof down to the window, to the door, to the window, and then this thing comes out, and then both plants. Okay? So once you're done with your keyframes, go into the dope sheet and start tweaking what those things look like. All right, so it looks like we got the gist of setting keys, the gist of going into the dope sheet. Just like everything, all of these things can be changed at any point. We can always go back and reset keyframes, delete keyframes, re-go in the dope sheet and play with it. All right, so I'm going to save as. I haven't saved as at all. And anytime you save your stuff, make sure you give it a name with your name on it so you can always find that file if you need it. Yep, go to Save Scene As, and it should put it inside of your Scenes folder. All right, now when we get to the subject of lighting and materials, it really is kind of like a back and forth kind of thing, just like animation. We could set the lighting up first and then do our materials. Either way, we're going to have to play with one or the other afterwards, okay? Typically, if you have a lot of complex things going on, it's best to do the lighting first, then your materials, and then adjust it from there. So I'm going to do the lighting first. In Arnold, there's a couple different ways that we can light our stuff. The easiest way for this specific one is to do a sky dome light. So if you go to where the bar is here, on mine it's cut off, but under Arnold you'll see lights and you'll see sky dome light. And what the sky dome light is basically just like this 3D sphere that encircles your entire area. And so that when we render it, we should get even lighting from every single side of our building. Under Arnold here, there's, on the far right, my screen cuts it off, it says Arnold, and then it says lights. Now if we want to see what's happening with our item, we go to Arnold and we say render. Now, if you don't have any lights in your scene, Arnold will just show nothing. It'll just be black because it just doesn't default to anything. This is an IPR, meaning that as we change stuff, as we rotate around, it will update. So if I were to hit play while I do that, it's going to do this, where it's trying to render and play and render and play, and obviously this is going to go really slow. Okay? So for this assignment, and for a lot of our assignments, this kind of lighting is sufficient. Okay? If you want to go a little bit further, this is some other stuff you could add to it. Okay, so I close my renderer. You don't need to worry about following this part because it'll be in the lecture. You can watch it after. Under color, I'm going to go to, in the attribute editor, I'm going to go to this map button right here. This allows me to connect files to different attributes, very similar to Cinema where you can connect pictures and textures to things. So I'm going to the color of this, and instead of it being solid white, I'm going to go to a file. And I went to this website called HDR Haven, and it allows you to download HDRs, which are basically 360-degree images that we could drop in. And so I'm essentially going to use this as my lighting instead of it just being pure white. So I'm going to go here. I put that image inside my source images. Okay, and then I'm just going to hit OK. It'll take a second to load. And we can see it. And then I'm going to go to Arnold again and go to render. And what we're going to see is instead of that pure white, that kind of like washed out look to this, it's going to actually have a bunch of different colors in there because it's more of like the real world. Okay, so instead of this being like a pure white or grayish, we are getting different values inside here. All right, cool. So that'll help make it a little bit more realistic. I typically don't want the background in there. That looks silly to have that. So I'm going to grab that sphere, and in the attribute editor, I'm going to go down to camera and just turn off visibility. And what that does is when it renders, it just doesn't show that in there. It's just like a blank color, okay? It's just black. I can't see my arrows. There we go. Okay, so I get the lighting. If there's reflections, I get those reflections. But I just don't see that back stuff, so that's cool. All right, so now for all the other items in here, I mean, that's pretty much my lighting. There's other lights in here. I'll have a separate video that goes through lighting. That way you can kind of see what each one of those lights do. But for now, that'll be sufficient, okay? For the materials on here, we can't actually select any of our geometry. Down here where it says display layers, this is all the, turn that off, turn that on, you can see it. And it's referenced, meaning that we can't select it, okay? And that's intentional because if I were to click this off and accidentally move something, now it's broke, okay? So typically when you have something rigged, you want to make sure that it stays rigged and not broken. So don't touch that. Over here in the outliner, this is where all the items are. Here's ground, here's left plant, here's house, right plant, and so on. So I'm just going to grab any one of these items, go to my hotbox, go to lighting and shading, assign new material, and then go to that AI standard surface under Arnold. Give it a name, so ground material. And then all of your stuff, just like before, should be very flat looking. You don't want to have anything too shiny. If you have something that's reflective, it's going to, the shine will follow it. It'll be very distracting. When you do your animation, it should focus on the animation. That's what people should be looking at. Not these crazy reflections in here, and not crazy colors. Like I wouldn't go with this like crazy bright red unless I had a specific intentional reason for it. I also would not put images on this. Like some people have tried putting like, here's a picture of grass. It doesn't look like grass. Don't put a picture of grass on it. Okay, so something like that is sufficient for grass. They get the idea. For my roughness, I'm going to crank the roughness up. Okay, so now I'll have a nice diffused green color for the ground. Okay, typically as I do my materials, I keep this window on my other screen. I'll hit the, I'll hit the stop button. So if I hit play, it'll just continuously update. So I'll hit the stop button, make changes, and then hit the play button. Make changes, hit the play button. Make changes, hit the play button. All right, so I'm just going to go through each one of these. Right plant and left plant, those probably will be the same material. So plants. Oops. Now I always like to put an underscore M at the end of it so I know it's a plant, it's a material. I'm going to use that same green that's here, but just make it a little bit brighter and take the roughness up. Maybe I'll give it a little bit less roughness. Just kind of pops a little bit more. Here's the house. Assign new material. Give it a color. I'm going to go with this and just slide this over to brown. And then take that roughness up some more. On the windows themselves, you can actually open the groups, and there should be the 3 pieces to this. Zoom in so you can see it. So there's this piece, which is that bar. There's this piece, which is that frame, and then there's this other piece. So if you wanted to give these 2 frames different colors so that, again, it just kind of pops, it's a little bit different, you could do that. I wouldn't make them see-through for sure because that wouldn't make sense, right? Standard surface. There. And roughness will be like that maybe. So you'll see, once we get to these parts, it's very repetitive. Just the same thing over and over again. Let's get there. This up. And pathway is the last thing. And you'll notice that I really haven't looked at any of the materials for this. If you know you're going to be doing a job like this, just the same thing over and over, do them all, then look at it, and then tweak from there. You do it however you want. That's how I do it. And this, I'm going to go there and then make it desaturated like that. I think this one I'm going to give it a little bit more or a little bit less roughness. We'll see what it looks like. Sufficient. Now on these, I have that bit of a less roughness on there, and you can see that shine. Yes, that's fine. You can see that shine coming off of this. So if I did it pretty flat or really flat, you wouldn't see the shine on there. So in this case, it works. If it didn't work, I would just take that roughness and make it more rough. If I didn't like the other way, I'd make it less rough. Okay, you can always go back and play with any of these settings, okay? It's gorgeous. I don't really care for the windows, but it's fine for our lecture.
For the windows, because it's only 3 parts, there's no way to separate that the window pane from the actual window?
The middle part here?
Yeah.
Yep, you can do that. If you go into that one, and you right click on it and go to face, you can grab just that face maybe. Let me hit this. No, but it's not letting us select it. All right, do I have to do that? Yes. All right, so you'd have to unlock that. Don't touch anything else. And then you can grab just that piece. And then you can assign that material to just that piece. Okay? Come on. There we go. I don't know what I call that window screen. I'll make that shiny. Okay, and I can do the same thing on the other one while I have it in unprotected mode. I'm going to right click out in Nowheresville, click face, click that. And then I'll just assign the existing material of window screen. And then before I break anything, I'll re-reference that. There we go. So now we do have a different material on there, right? Just be careful with it, again, because if you accidentally move something away from where it's at, it may not work, like those plants. I'm going to unreference this and move one of the plants just so you can see what happens. If I were to grab this plant here, just one of these pieces, and move it, let's go back as it's growing, there we go. And then I grab one of these pieces and moved it. It's just going to make a liar out of me. Why aren't you playing nicely? There it goes. So I move it up and down, we're seeing it. If I move it left and right, we're not really seeing it. Oh, there it goes. There, look at that. See? Horrible. Okay. So that's why you wouldn't want to do something like that, because it'll screw things up. Cool. So we went in here and we set keyframes. Then we went to the dope sheet and tweaked their keyframes. We made our dome light. We added some materials to this. We can tweak them, obviously. Anytime you tweak a material, you can just hit Control-A, click on the item you're trying to edit, and it'll be in one of those tabs. Or that little thing I showed you last time with, collapse some of these. There we go. This Hypershade. This will have all your materials in it, and typically this is the best way to get to your materials, is going through the Hypershade and then adjusting it from here. And then the last thing that we would want to do is set up some sort of camera for this. And the camera setup is really no different than anything else we've already done, except instead of setting one keyframe, we're going to set a whole bunch of them, okay? So under Panels Perspective, you can make a new camera. Okay, and obviously we want to make sure our animation is done before we do this part, because this is where we are syncing up our camera's movement to the animation. And if one of those changes, then they're both going to change. I'm going to rename this to be Render Cam. And I need to see what's going to render. So if I were to click this and drag this over here and click this and drag this over here, this area is very tall, but my rendering would not be very tall. So we have to have some way to know this is what's actually going to render. Put that back where it was, put this back to where it was. This blue circle right here is your resolution gate. Cinema automatically has its resolution gate on, Maya doesn't. So this is what it's actually going to render. If I squish this that way, you can see that that updates, and that's still what's going to render. The resolution should be at 960 by 540. That's the stuff that before I gave it to you, I set it to. And so now I'm just going to set this up. Now I'm going to do it backwards. If I go here to the beginning, I don't know where my stuff is at. So it's hard to set up what the camera is supposed to look like at the start of it. So I'm going to go to the end, and set up what I want the camera to look like. So let's say I wanted it to end here. Actually, I should look and see where my animation ends. Right about there. So my animation ends about 95 or 6. So I'm going to go to about 100. I have nothing selected here. I'm going to set a key. Then I'm going to rewind to frame 1, and I'm just going to do a simple turn with the camera. You are not Quentin Tarantino. This is not Michael Mann. No, what's his name? Michael Bay. It's not Michael Bay. We're not going to zip through the house as every piece kind of builds. It's nice and smooth. We're looking at the animation for the camera. That's what we're looking at. So now I hit play, and that's a horrible camera. Look at that. I'm under the ground. I'm going to tilt a little bit and then reset my keyframe. There you go. That's better. Now what should happen is our house is pretty centered so that we can see all the detail of it. If we're off center, that's going to look weird. If the house is at some weird angle, if it's too far away, there's a lot of things we want to pay attention to. It's going to look weird. If your camera doesn't look right and you're like, I don't know what to do, blah, 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 you can grab all your keyframes here, right click, delete them, and then just reset your keyframes on top of those, okay, or reset new keyframes. The very least, if you're like really screwed it up, delete the camera, there it is, make a new one, and then go from there, okay? Also look around to see what other features there are. Let me make a new camera and show you what I don't want anytime you render your stuff out. Bad cam. Okay. So I'm going to go to frame 1. Okay, the house is about there. I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to get really close to this tree. Okay, now I'm going to rewind it and play it. All right, the house goes off screen. I can't see the house. I need to put on my resolution gate too. There you go. I can't see the house. So then I'm going to say, okay, well, I'll fix that. I'll just go to, let's say, here, and I'll just move the house back in here. And I hit play again. And did you notice that weird jerk right in the middle of it? Like right there, right? Not a nice smooth camera from one side to the other. Don't try to correct stuff on top of your stuff that you've already done. Because typically what people do is say, oh, that looks weird. I'm going to go here now, and I'll fix it. And so now it's like changing speeds in the middle of it. Or what people do is they want to show off all the features of it. So they, here's the window coming in. I want to show the window. I'm going to zoom in on the window. Oh, I want to show this thing, like when that tongue comes out, I want to show that. This will be a cool angle. All right, and then what else? Oh, maybe the top of the house will be a cool shot. Right? So hopefully you guys have had your Dramamine. Right? Now it sounds silly, but I have people who've turned stuff in like this. You obviously haven't looked at your camera, you haven't looked at your animation, you haven't looked at the pleasingness of this. Holy cow. So that's the bad camera. Don't do bad camera stuff. Now, even to be a little bit more finicky with how we do our things, this specific camera angle isn't something that is a shot that we would use in our portfolio, okay? This is just a for fun thing to learn the tools. That's all this is. Nobody's going to look at that and give you a job. This is a skill builder. However, we want to build skills. So one of the things that we're going to see is what is the camera doing at the start and the end of this animation? Easing. It eases into the motion, does its stuff, and it eases out of it. So what would happen is if I had a camera and another camera and another camera and another camera, every one of these would basically ease into the movement and ease out. Then the next one, ease into the movement, ease out. If you watch movies and you kind of pay attention to how they're moving cameras, usually they're moving a camera like in the middle of a movement. They're not getting it at the start of it. You never see them just like starting to move a camera. You see the camera already moving. So that's what we want it to look like. Yes. So I'm going to go into the graph editor for the camera. I'm going to grab my keyframes and just make them linear. And what this is going to do is my camera will be in a constant motion Okay, so now when I hit play, it looks like there's no easing, and it looks like it could just be part of a bigger shot. So if I were to cut this right at the start of this or cut this right at the end of this, you would never know that that's the actual end of this animation. It would seem like there's more things going on, okay? Very nice. Cool. I'll save that. I do recommend also incrementing and saving. Maya has a hotkey Control Alt and S. Yeah, I know you didn't, whatever. It says you can't save anything, you didn't change anything. All right, I'll hit play and then I'll save it. Oh, whatever. There we go. So now it'll save it as House 00 or 0001. Okay? So that's going to be the process. So by the end of today, you should be able to get your keyframes, get your lights, get your textures on there, and create a camera in the next hour and so minutes that we have. Over